We have up next a much anticipated conversation. I know that lots of people have been looking forward to this all day. And it is now time for us to welcome two key figures from our industry to join us for a very high-level conversation. And it's not often that you get two people of this stature in conversation in public. So we're very excited to hear the thoughts on building resilient, high-performing organizations. So I'm sure you'll want to join me in welcoming Richard Teng, the CEO of Binance, and Frederick Gregard, the CEO of the Cardano Foundation, plus their moderator. We have May Ben Khadra, of course, who you'll know from CNBC Arabia. Welcome to the stage.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I know that this session is really a very much anticipated one. It's one of the key sessions that we're going to have during this summit. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, I don't have to introduce either Richard or Frederick here because we are sitting with two visionary, prominent, industry-changing leaders who are going to share with us their insights about building an organization that is resilient in the blockchain space. But we promise you there will be more to this discussion. We're going to talk about a lot of the headlines we are all watching globally. So I would like to start with you, Richard, and Binance Blockchain Week 2024. Why is it different, in your opinion, than any previous year? And especially when it comes to this positive sentiment that we are seeing around the globe toward crypto assets since the start of the year.
Great. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So we're holding Binance Blockchain Week next week, 30th and 31st of October. It promised to be a much bigger event, much better. We have great speakers. We have great innovators around the world joining us next week. So if you have not joined us, please make sure that you mark the dates. There are more than 4,000 people now coming through. And I'm sure there's a lot of exciting side events, exciting side conversation. The theme of Binance Blockchain Week this year is momentum. I think it's very appropriate for what we are seeing in 2024. We are seeing great momentum on various fronts on the crypto and blockchain scene, right? So if you look at recent research that's just released by Ernst & Young, 94% of institutions are bullish about blockchain and crypto on that front. About 50% intends to make investments into that front. And if you look at, earlier on in the year, the approval of the ETFs in the States and subsequently all around the world, from Hong Kong, Australia to Brazil, those are big shifts in terms of mindset from the institutional front. I got involved in 2017 in the blockchain space, and I must tell you, all these are really, really satisfying to see. 2024 is a landmark year in terms of the institutional shift into crypto, as well as greater regulatory clarity that's coming through into this space. And mainstreaming will start from now. The pace of adoption is going to be very, very fast going forward.
You mentioned two key factors that shape the crypto industry during this year. And Frederick, I would like to come to you with this. So we have the regulatory framework and as well as more institutional adoption. And that has impacted hugely crypto assets. To what extent do you think that this is also pushing more enterprises and more adoption for blockchain technologies as well?
So I think when I speak to global regulators around the world and to exchanges, what I see is I see a change. So the regulators is asking, well, you listed these 10 meme coins. So what is that actually? What kind of token is that? What does it represent? What kind of consumer protection do we need? And it's a little bit about like FX in the 90s. We were trading all FX pairs, and we were leveraging 100 times, and we were doing a lot of things. And then there came some regulatory scrutiny around it, and it sort of settled down and became very institutional. And I think what happened here is that we saw institutional adoption mainly coming to the blue chips with the ETFs and the approvals, but there's still a bit of a wild, wild west going on some of the DEXs and some of the exchanges. And what we're going to probably see is we're going to see more native assets and tokens who has an underlying liquidity formation or cash flow model or has some kind of purpose and utility, winning in on the exchanges.
So when we talk about building an organization in the blockchain space that is resilient, compliance is a huge issue. And of course, the headlines now around in the crypto industry mainly is focusing on the legal issues CZ is facing. I want to ask you, Richard, to what extent does Binance today have a different perspective toward legal regulatory environment, toward compliance? To what extent did that reshape what Binance is doing in this regard?
Yeah, maybe if I can just give some context on that front. So Binance started in 2017. So it's a 7-year-old firm, it's a very young enterprise. I got involved in crypto around 2017 as well. I got to know crypto around 2017 March, right? And Binance started in July. And at that point in time, I'm wearing a regulatory hat. I was the CEO of Abu Dhabi Global Markets, looking at regulations. And the more I got to know about blockchain and crypto, the more I believe that it's going to be the future of finance, right? But for it to take off, for it to be accepted mainstream, you need 2 elements to come into play, and those are the 2 elements that we have just spoken. First, you need institutional adoption. This asset class is very unique, unlike any other asset class that goes from institutions to corporate to high net worth individuals, and then ultimately to retail. This went the opposite direction. If you remember, retail was the only one embracing this, not the corporates, not the high net worth, not the institutions. And for me, you need to bring about that for this to really go upstream and go mainstream on that front. The second element that comes into play is really regulatory clarity. Because only then will all the crypto players know what the parameters that can operate within, what are the protection for users in terms of the various areas that users need to look forward to, right? But no regulators were doing it in 2017, right? If you think about it, no institutions do not believe that this asset class will last at that point in time.
That's true.
So at ADGM, we became one of the first in the world to then develop a very comprehensive framework to start regulating this asset class. Because it's only then that you give the parameters for exchanges, for fund managers, for OTC players, for token issuance to know what to do within that framework. Obviously, in those early days, the rules were very formative, very nascent. So we are dealing with a very totally different environment then. I think in the last 2 years, I think the regulators are now catching on. They're putting forth new frameworks to start regulating. This year has been a landmark year, as I say, when the largest money manager in the world, BlackRock, Larry Finn, said that he used to be a skeptic, he used to be a non-believer, to a believer in this space. I think that speaks volume, right? On our own, we see a lot of those. So again, now the direction of travel is very clear, right? Compliance is the way to go, and we have invested greatly on that front. Last year alone, we invested about 213 million into our compliance program.
Wow.
And that represents a 30% increase over the previous year in 2022. This year, the figure will go up even more, right? And we are very privileged and blessed in the sense that we can make those sort of investments into our compliance. We intend to make compliance a competitive advantage for ourselves because we have the ability to do so. But compliance cost is going to creep up quite quickly for many players. And not every player in this space will have the privilege to make the sort of investments that we make into this space to make it a competitive advantage. So we intend to make this a key area of growth for us. Our user number on that front, we are deployed globally. Our user number continued to grow sharply, which is part of mainstreaming that I mentioned. This year alone, we saw a 56 million increase in number of new users. Right? So we have now about 236 million users on our platform. We have regulatory approval in 20 different places around the world. More recently in Argentina, in India, in Indonesia, and the list goes on. So compliance is a key area that we focus a lot of attention on to make sure that we do things the right way.
So I would like to hear from you, Frederick. So to what extent do you think that compliance will have to go hand in hand with the legal framework and regulatory clarity? Because when you have this kind of uncertainty around regulation, it will be more difficult to comply and it will be more costly as well. But at the end, it's a factor that determines to what extent you have a very stable and sustainable blockchain organization.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is that capital markets and assets, specifically financial assets, fall under the Financial Assets and Capital Markets Regulation, and we need to be compliant with the local law. However, I do think there's a lot of new models on blockchain who is not capital market assets or not money in that intent. They are being used to do something completely different, whether that is a supply chain use case or whether that is, ensuring your synthetic biology is represented with the right check marks before you start injecting that into a plant or something like that. And I think what we have to do right now is we need to fight two fights. One is the fight about freedom, on how we can liberate the financial market infrastructure and make it more efficient. And I think that's where Binance is doing extremely well. And then we need to fight another fight, which is about ensuring that everything you do on a blockchain is not necessarily financially regulated, but it might fall under another regulation, consumer protection, healthcare, whatever that might be. And very frequently, what I see is defragmentation. So for instance, you have maybe a single regulator who takes care of digital assets, and they maybe do a very narrow scope of what that really is, and then you have uncertainty about all the other things. So you might have a DEX who's transferring two types of tokens who actually shouldn't be classified as a financial token, right? It should be outside of that, but because it lives maybe in a gaming sense or something like that. And there we are really just scratching the surface, and we urgently need clarity, and we need to ensure that the industry comes together and participate in those discussions, because otherwise we will get to a situation that blockchain becomes synonymous with crypto, and crypto becomes synonymous with the old financial markets, and then we can't upgrade the infrastructure, and we can't get the job growth and the GDP growth, which we actually can do with this kind of new emerging technology.
So, Richard, you talked about having more than 236 million users for Binance Exchange. How do you protect them?
Well, that is a very important subject matter. I think we always place our user interest front. First and foremost, we are a very user-focused organization. User protection is at the forefront of everything we do. And every decision we make, right, we have to make sure that users are protected in terms of their interests. So just several instances, right? So from the very early days, even though regulators are not prescribing this, we came up with what we call a SAFU fund, Safe Asset for User fund, right? Just in case in the untowards and unexpected episode where there's a security breach, right? There is enough money to compensate our users, right? So the fund now stands north of $1 billion US. Right? So we are at the forefront. I mean, before anybody else is doing something like that, we push forward with that. We push forward with things like, proof of reserve that give transparency, right, to users on their assets on the platform. And if you think about it, traditional financial institutions are not capable of such innovation on things like proof of reserve, right? They are not going to show you, where exactly does your assets reside within the bank or financial institutions. But with this technology, we are able to do it, and we push forward with those transparency. On the security front, we invest other than compliance. We invest very heavily into security and user protection. So just this year alone, we help our users avoid 2.4 billion equivalent of potential fraud and scams, right? In terms of transferring to things like poison wallets, etc. We help them recover north of 73 million in terms of stolen funds, and we work very closely with law enforcement globally on that front. So we continue to place a premium to make sure that all our users are protected on that front. And we always advise, we invest a lot of money into education as well, right? I get asked a lot of times, what to buy, what tokens to buy. I always say, do your own research. It's very important that. And we don't only educate the users via things like Binance Academy, which is a free-to-air portal, which have, from beginners to very advanced learner on that front. We work with universities around the world. We work with different educational institutions that build blockchain curriculum into their curriculum. We actually educate policymakers and law enforcement agencies around the world. Last year alone, we held close to 100 classes around the world for law enforcement agencies to highlight to them the power of this technology Unlike fiat money, where once you transfer, it's very difficult to know who you give the money to. This is a traceable technology, right? So how do you use this to fight financial crimes, for instance? How do you counter the narrative that this is used for money laundering, right? It's extremely difficult because we can trace where the money go to. We can work with law enforcement agencies globally on that front. So again, educational effort is extremely important, right, for everyone.
A trending topic globally now doesn't only have to do with the blockchain, but with AI as well. Anything that is AI driven or has a prospect in terms of room for growth in the space of AI is just skyrocketing. So I want to ask you, Frederick, to what extent do you think that there might be some convergence we're going to see later on between AI and blockchain, and what does that mean? How can AI alter and add to blockchain technologies?
So what Richard really was saying about the proof of reserve is a really good place to start. So what we're actually building in the Cardano Foundation is the idea that normally you have a centralized ledger, nothing to do with blockchain, it's just how you run your financial accounts, right? And nobody has access to that. And one time a year you invite, an audit company, they come in their, their black suits, right? And they charge you hours and they look at a little bit at the financial transactions. Oh, I see fraud there, And that's really not a good way to do it. So what we're actually building in the Cardano Foundation is the idea that every single transactions or financial transaction, whether it's my credit card bill or salary run or rent for the office and so on, gets represented on the Cardano blockchain. And I'm coming back to privacy in a second. And then we basically are able to get the banks to give the account statements directly on the blockchain, including the reference rate for yield and for interest and for euro dollar and so forth. And then we can pull that back. We can build the balance sheet, and we can post the balance sheet out on the blockchain. And now you actually get the next generation of proof of reserves, because now you make everybody who wants to, and you have no extra cost, they can start using tools to see if there is a match between that. Now, you don't necessarily want to expose all the privacy data, so whose salary is it exactly? But when you start using, AI and language models and that, you start getting pattern recognition. So you start being able to see how many rebookings did the finance department do. If it's a holding company with sub-holdings, what's happening there. And that hopefully will entail, a retail investor or a person who may not have an ownership share in the company to come to the General Assembly because they're very good in AI or very good in systems and regression analysis and say, hey, I only have one share, but dear chairperson, I have a question. Right? And the more people we allow to get that kind of information, to get trust in a different aspect than just with the signature, that's going to change the way we run companies. Now, fast forward now to ChatGPT and Gemini. What we're doing today is we're asking ChatGPT and Gemini about thousands of different things, and it's been trained on, corrupt data, basically, right? Because it's not accurate data which is on the internet. There are so many bots and Twitter bots who is doing certain things to change narratives and so on. So it's not verified data. But what's so beautiful on a blockchain is everything you do on a blockchain costs a little bit. So that's the fact that it costs a little bit already cleans some of the data. Now the second part, what's happening, right, is that if you suddenly can imagine when you went to the doctor 10 years ago, you got some prescription medicine, right, and you can't remember what it was, and you can't remember what was said about it, right, but the doctor have a file about it, but you don't have that data.
Yes.
When you are able to start harvesting that kind of data, you have actually sort of a twin, a digital twin of yourself. But that digital twin is more powerful than any version of yourself right now.
Because it has so much data and knowledge built in.
Yeah.
And now what I'm talking about is that I'm creating a digital twin of companies with all the financial transactions, and I'm creating a digital twin of people with all their past digital records, right? And then I put the large language models on top of that, and because it's clean data, and because it's data who's confined about you, right, using a very heavy identity scheme, we're now able to harvest the power of an AI in a way we've never done before. This is going to massively boost it, but it requires a foundation built on standards, decentralization, and infrastructure, because if you start hacking that, you get into really big problems.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. How do you protect this data? I mean, it takes a huge infrastructure to have a protection system for such huge amounts of data.
Actually, we do have that today, and that's really good that you're asking that question. It's called a public permissionless blockchain. So when you look at the market cap of Bitcoin, of Cardano and something, that's a bounty which all hackers are going after today. So we know that for a fact that at any given time we have thousands of attacks going into the Cardano blockchain, to the Bitcoin blockchain, and trying to withdraw that. So we do know we have the type of security we need for the enterprise model, and for the private model, what we are hearing the regulators are saying, and more, I mean, sometimes money talks. The reinsurance companies and the insurance companies are saying, dear bank, dear exchange, you're now having so many hacks where the identity was stolen, money is being withdrawn, and you come to me and I'm claiming it, right? And now they're saying, I'm not going to pay you anymore because if you have 100 hacks a year, you cannot protect that data. And now we get into the magic of zero knowledge proof and the idea that for the first time the regulator is going to find a very good idea that you manage your own data. As long as the entity you interact with, the vendor, has the possibility of doing AML and KYC in an authenticated way. And now what you see is magic, because this is UAE. In Abu Dhabi, they actually allow that. Under the local regulator, they actually allow to use CK rollups and proofs that the financial institution doesn't need to have all of that data. Now the technology is just catching up, and just a couple of weeks ago we did the last hard fork, which allows something called BLS signatures, and our great ICANN team is already looking at it, and another community project called CK Rollup is looking at these things. But in this way what you're going to see is AI is going to power that up dramatically, the users of the blockchain, and this proof of reserves is going to be the forefront together with what we're building in the Cardano Foundation to change the way we think about trust mitigation on companies today.
Okay, so let's make some news. We are here today in Dubai. What kind of regulations, what kind of planning would you like the UAE government to do or to adopt in the next 5 years when it comes to blockchain or crypto assets? Richard.
Well, I think if you look at the journey of the UAE, it has always been pushing the forefront of embracing new things and changes, right? So on that front, I've been here in this region since 2015. I've seen all these changes, many transformational in nature. I initially got involved in setting up a new financial center in Abu Dhabi Global Market, and by now it's a very established center. If you look at, it's extremely vibrant now. When I first started it, we were drafting the foundational level of laws and requirements, and that's 2015. Look at how fast it has grown. But embracing blockchain is something that UAE has done very early on compared to many other countries, and continue to push the boundaries on that front, right? By creating a very vibrant ecosystem, by allowing talents to come in quite naturally, the best and drawing the best and brightest, where other countries and other regulators are taking a hostile approach sometimes towards crypto and blockchain. This region, this country is extremely embracing and welcoming, and that has resulted in the creation of a very vibrant ecosystem here. We look at all the events that's being held here, all the talent pool, all the new projects that's being built here. I think it's down to that, embracing ecosystem, having smart regulators that start to look at what does it mean to do to bring forth smart regulations to really embrace and support this ecosystem. What do I mean by smart regulations? Most of the regulators just focus on one aspect, just the risk aspect, right? To mitigate risk. That's what regulators are paid to do. But to be an outstanding regulator, my view is you have to pay attention to the growth aspect of it, right? And that's what I mean by smart regulation. Because regulation is not a be-all and end-all. It must be there to help create value for the industry, for the economy, or for the talent pool, right? And that type of regulations is what we are finding here in UAE, in the region. And slowly, I think some of the other regulators globally are embracing that. So, be it ADGM, VARA, ESCA, the central bank are embracing this. Central bank just recently issued regulations on stablecoin, for instance, right? And we applaud all these initiatives. The more clarity that you can give to the industry, the better the industry is. And if you look at the blockchain adoption and crypto adoption in UAE itself, it's one of the highest in the world. right? And that is really the result of all this government initiative and efforts.
So, Frederick, what message would you give to the regulator here in UAE?
I'm just laughing because Richard and I spoke about it, and he said, "Hey, Fred, you are very much an optimist, right?"
Yeah, I'm an optimist.
And I'm even going above that, right? So I think there's a couple of things I would love to see. So the first thing I have to highlight is that people really have the ability to vote with their feet. And what you see is there's such a big net inflow of people and businesses in UAE, so they're doing something right. And you can just look at the population growth and you can basically establish that is the point. The next point is in thinking, what is the role of UAE and the region in the next 10, 20, 30 years? And here we have a very interesting concept about stability and a very long-term strategy. And that is very attractive in a world who's coming apart, where we see inflation being huge, where we see nation states changing regimes, where we see old partnerships being broken up. People are looking for stability to operate their business. They're looking for clarity to enable to do emerging technologies such as cryptocurrencies and blockchains. And UAE is definitely offering that. But UAE is very small. I mean, it is extremely small. So what I was dreaming of and what I would like to see is that UAE gets to a point where some kind of passporting, whatever is possible, because this has really been a no-go area and you couldn't do this, right? Because everybody's protecting their own pond. But some kind of passporting within the emerging technology space is happening. So thinking about how UAE become a part of actually creating global standards for enterprise blockchain, for CK rollups, for transparency, for digital assets, and on purpose trying to add it up in different buckets, because I think if you take everything into one bucket, it won't happen. And you probably have to start somewhere else than capital markets. You have to start around the risk mitigation and the security frameworks around critical infrastructure. So you might want to start with hardware, or you might want to start with logistics, or how goods are trading. And if you take what the World Trade Organization has done in terms of digitizing the standard contracts, so they're binary readable, and then think about, instead of talking about blockchain, you actually implement a type of blockchain that everything you do on that blockchain is regulatory conform, without necessarily AML and KYC everybody. So when you start building business processes, as long as you're within those business processes, you know what you're doing is okay. And then use these binary contracts in how you move goods from the east to the west through UAE. I think you have a winning formula, which you then later can take into capital markets.
So when I posted on my social media that I'm moderating this session, many of the viewers asked me, please ask them how bullish are they toward crypto assets. Now, we're not going to talk about prices here, everybody chill out. But I would like to know from you, Richard, because going in late 2023, you were extremely bullish on crypto assets generally. Are you today more bullish than the start of the year?
Well, I think for those of us that have been involved in crypto for long enough, crypto tends to move in 4-year cycle, right? And the bull normally starts about half a year, 160 days after a Bitcoin halving episode, right? So we're right into that period now. I am bullish. I'm vested in this phase, right? I own tokens on that front. I'm bullish for a few factors, right? So if you look at, other than the Bitcoin halving episode, institutions are coming through in a big way.
Which is something we didn't have in 2023.
Which is something that we didn't have before. They're bringing new liquidity, new user base, new user pool, right? And with the institutions, they're creating a lot more products. I mean, if you look at what's happening throughout the world, other than the approval of ETFs, you have wealth planners around the world for private banks now starting to advise their clients to do allocations. On our front, I mentioned that we have about 56 million new users this year. But year to year, compared to last year, for year to date, we saw a 131% increase in number of institutional onboarding on our platform alone. So you can see a lot more family offices, a lot more high net worth individuals, a lot more institutions are starting to increase the allocation into this space. You have many trading firms in the past that just used to trade commodities, FX, stocks, bonds, now adding a crypto trading desk, right, to this. And we are still very, very early in the game. We're about 5 to 6% crypto adoption globally. If you look at the pace of growth, the first 100 million users took us 5 years, right? The next 100 million users took us 26 months. It's just north of 2 years. And the third 100 million users will take us even shorter period of time. That shows the pace of adoption, right? And the pace of adoption in the next 5 years is going to be much faster than the last 5 years. And for all those multitude of reasons, including greater regulatory clarity, which allow for more mainstreaming, which allow for more users to gain confidence to come into this space, for all those reasons and the utility, the new innovative projects that's coming through, the best and brightest are working in either blockchain space or AI space, make me extremely bullish for this trend.
That's interesting. And Frederick, I have a good one for you as well. So I've been covering international business news for the last 10 years. Not that that has to do anything with how old I am. Please don't do that. But just generally, never have I seen a US election have an impact on an asset such as that we're seeing today. And there seems to be this very high bar set for a Republican presidency and what that means for the regulations, the regulatory framework of crypto assets. Do you think that this is something that matters? Who wins the president election and what kind of impact will they have on the regulations?
I think people are looking at it in the wrong lens. So when we look at it so isolated, there's always two sides of the coin, right? So it's Bitcoin versus dollar, and most things are denominated in dollar.
That's true.
And the question everybody is saying is, if Bitcoin goes up, is that because the value of Bitcoin increases, or is that because the value of dollar diminishes? On the long time horizon, what we're going to see is that the US is very interested in growth. They're interested in creating a stability, which they used to have, and they're interested in ensuring that there is abundance for the people they serve. And what they cannot deny is that blockchain is a part of enabling new technologies and guiding and steering new technologies, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from a safety perspective. So when we start looking at the long time horizon, this election is not going to mean too much. What it's really going to do is going to just make it abundantly clear that if they get this wrong, other countries is going to get an opportunity to be a part of the world order. And then we have players like where we're sitting here, but also Singapore is doing an amazing job, who's going to take the leadership in how we define, world trade and growth. And with the market the size of the US, I'm not so sure they can allow that. So if you look at the top market cap of the 10 largest companies in the world, they're all US. You have to get down around 16, 17, and then you find a little bit of diversity there, right? You even have a Danish company coming now due to Novo Nordisk and the medicine they're offering,
Yes.
right? But you see a very large concentration. But you also see that jobs are not there anymore, and you see technology is moving faster and faster outside the US. So I think when I look at the long lens, the US will definitely catch up. I really think so, due to the market size.
Do you agree, Richard?
No, definitely. I think the fact that it is part of the conversation of US election just show the growing influence of this industry, right? I mean, 4 years ago, it is not part of that conversation. But it's not only in the US, right? If you look at many of the other political developments around the world, right? It has now featured into the consciousness of political candidates, of the election electorates, so to say, right? So that just showed the growing influence of crypto. I think different people will have different view on this thing. I take the long-term view that long-term it doesn't quite matter. Because this is a technology, it continues to evolve, it's transformational. And going back to the point about AI and blockchain,
Yes.
I believe that these two transformational technology will form the foundational layer for every economic sector going forward, from real estate to media to financial infrastructure to supply chain, etc., etc. Because if you look at it, you just take financial institutions, financial sector, the middle and back office technology in many instances are quite archaic, right? So if you want to think about the future, what technology do you want to build those on, right? So many firms still build trading and settlement, for traditional stocks and bonds still do T+2, T+3. Blockchain is instantaneous, it's immutable, you can't change the records, etc. So there are so many good use cases coming through, right? So long term, this technology, I don't think is going to impact. You have different governments coming through to embrace it, because it's only then that you can bring about much greater economic development and growth, bring through the talent pool that's needed to support this sector. But near term, it might have some impact.
So let me ask you, have you watched the HBO documentary on who is the real Satoshi Nakamoto?
We are all Satoshi.
I wanted to ask you, do you think that it's really Peter Todd?
I think he has come out to deny that, right?
Yes, he did.
On that front. I've not watched a documentary. Going back to the joke that I have just now, I think all of us, especially those involved in this sector, at some point in time ask this question, but I don't think we want to find out. Bitcoin is extremely decentralized, and we want to keep it that way, right?
Yeah.
So I joke that we are all Satoshi, but many of us are very early adopters and believers in this space when nobody believed in this space. So I think we all deserve to give ourselves a pat on the back to say that job well done. The pace of growth is going to be much faster going forward. The future is very bright for this sector.
Frederick, I feel when I ask this question is like another question, interesting question I have. Is there intelligent life beyond Earth? Now, this question is exactly the same for me. So do you believe that it matters for us to know who is the real Satoshi?
No, I think it's completely
Okay,
irrelevant. But I think what's really relevant is that whoever that person was, he actually created the tenets for how to really change the incentive mechanisms politicians will have in the future. And I think we forget that sometimes because we think, a blockchain is just a blockchain. But the concept of, for instance, sound money, which Bitcoin have and Cardano has, the concepts of UTXO, which many people cannot explain, but what that really does is enable us to do some things which cannot happen on other blockchains. His ideas about, being able to move money between two persons and settle that without an intermediary, including the metadata and the trail where it could be identity, but it could also be, proof of an identity. Some of those things are extremely powerful, and I think we need to ensure that they live on in how we build the future protocols, who's going to lie underneath, as Richard said, all technology in all industries. And Cardano is best suited for that.
Thank you so much for such a beautiful, interesting, and insightful discussion from two industry leaders. I mean, you're changing the world. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Sukran.